Welcome. Today we're doing a deep dive into uh, China's economic toolkit. Basically, how these tools could be used strategically, maybe in a trade conflict scenario.
Exactly. We're looking at their, let's call it strategic playbook, drawing on the material we've analyzed.
And the idea isn't just to list things, right? We want to get into the how and the why.
Precisely. We're aiming to dissect these tools, understand how they actually work, their strategic weight, give you that real-world context so you can see the potential implications.
Okay, let's jump in. A big one, obviously, is rare earth elements. The source material highlights that China's edge isn't just mining. It's the whole supply chain.
That's crucial. It's the processing, the refining,
Yeah.
the specialized expertise they have. That's a huge barrier, even if someone else finds a big deposit.
Right. It's not just digging rocks out of the ground.
Not at all. The tech involved in separating and refining these elements is complex, and they've really mastered it.
So how could they use this? The sources get specific, mentioning targeted restrictions, like neodymium and dysprosium.
Yeah, those are critical. Think high-strength magnets. You need them for EV motors, for wind turbines. Really important stuff.
So if China restricts exports of those specific elements,
It could seriously slow down, say, the U.S. push for green energy. It shows how economic tools can hit specific policy goals, makes trade disputes way more complicated.
very targeted kind of pressure.
Yeah.
And the material also mentions playing favorites, like restricting some but prioritizing others.
Uh-huh. The idea is they could prioritize exports to countries involved in the Belt and Road Initiative, for example.
So strengthening those ties while squeezing competitors.
Exactly. It's a way to bolster their own sphere of influence while applying pressure elsewhere, a strategic redirection, not just a blunt cutoff.
Makes sense. What about price manipulation? The sources talk about that too.
Well, they have a couple of options there. They could create artificial scarcity, hold a back
Yeah.
supply even if they have it.
Driving up prices globally.
Right. Makes it more expensive for U.S. companies, hits their competitiveness. Or they could do the opposite.
Flood the market.
Yeah, dump rare earths on the market to crash the price. That makes it really hard for anyone else thinking of starting their own mines or processing plants. It just wouldn't be economical. Kills off potential competition.
A way to maintain long-term dominance.
Hmm.
Okay, and this refining tech you mentioned, the sources say that gives them leverage, technology leverage.
Definitely. Because if other countries want to build their own full supply chains, they kind of need that processing know-how.
So China could demand something in return, like technology transfer.
It's a possibility. Access to that crucial processing step could become a bargaining chip. So you see, even if you found a mountain of rare earths somewhere else.
You'd still face the hurdle of how to actually process them efficiently.
Exactly. That's the next big challenge.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about financial power. China holds a lot of U.S. Treasury bonds. The sources mention financial warfare, but maybe not in the way people immediately think.
Right. It's framed more as a long game, not some sudden, massive sell-off, which frankly would probably hurt China too by crashing the value of what they still hold.
So what's the strategy then?
It's more subtle, a gradual reduction over time, maybe slowly selling off treasuries while, diversifying.
Diversifying into what? Other currencies? Gold?
Could be. Other major currencies, gold, maybe even things like digital currencies eventually. It signals a strategic shift away from the dollar, but slowly, carefully. Less like warfare, more like strategic signaling.
And the sources connect this to China investing in other countries,
Yeah.
like infrastructure projects. How does that fit?
Well, financing big projects in, say, Africa or Asia, often not using US dollars for those deals, that helps build an alternative economic ecosystem.
One less reliant on the dollar.
Precisely. It's part of that long-term play to chip away at the dollar's global dominance.
What about timing? The sources mention strategic buying or selling during, like, economic uncertainty.
Yeah, that can amplify the impact. Imagine selling a chunk of treasuries when the U.S. economy is already looking a bit shaky. It could add to market volatility, maybe dent confidence a bit.
Not a knockout blow, but adding pressure.
Exactly, subtle pressure. It could be used as leverage, perhaps, in diplomatic talks, a nudge rather than a shove.
And this all ties into promoting the yuan internationally.
Absolutely. The more the yuan is used in global trade and finance, the less central the dollar becomes, which raises a big question for you, the listener. What would it mean globally if the dollar wasn't quite so dominant? How would trade change?
Definitely something to think about. Okay, moving beyond resources and finance. Let's talk supply chains. The sources stress this interconnectedness.
Yeah, this is huge. Modern manufacturing is incredibly complex, right? Think semiconductors. The
Okay.
US might design the most advanced chips, but maybe a crucial component or a specific part of the assembly process happens almost exclusively in China.
Like a bottleneck.
Exactly, a choke point. Control over those choke points, even if they seem small, gives you immense leverage. And it's not just chips, think pharmaceuticals, other essential goods. There are dependencies woven throughout.
So identifying and potentially squeezing those specific choke points. What about using regulations? The sources mentioned regulatory hurdles.
Oh, yeah. Imagine sudden new rules, new standards, maybe complex certification processes suddenly appearing for foreign companies operating in China.
Designed to disrupt things.
Could be. It can cause delays, increase costs, make operations much harder, maybe even force companies to rethink being there. Or they could create new standards that just happen to favor Chinese domestic companies.
A subtle way to tilt the playing field.
Pretty much.
Then there's this unreliable entity list. Even the name sounds ominous. What does that actually do?
It creates, well, fear, uncertainty. If you're a company relying on Chinese suppliers or operating there, the threat of ending up on that list is serious. It could mean trade restrictions, reputational damage.
So it discourages reliance on China.
It certainly makes companies think twice, doesn't it? It pushes them to consider diversifying, finding alternatives. Think about it. How does that kind of background uncertainty affect your long-term plans if you're a business leader?
Yeah, not ideal.
Yeah.
Let's pivot again. What about the Chinese market itself? That sheer size has to be a tool.
Absolutely enormous leverage. The sources talk about consumer boycotts, for instance.
Driven by.
Could be state-encouraged campaigns, or sometimes just nationalist sentiment bubbling up, maybe amplified by social media. A U.S. brand seen as anti-China could face a sudden, massive backlash. Sales plummet, reputation damaged. It's happened.
A powerful way to influence corporations. And regulators can play a role too, limiting access.
Sure. Complex rules, opaque approval processes, barriers that make it tough for foreign companies to get in or compete effectively in certain sectors.
Like licensing, data rules.
All sorts of things. Plus, controlling the flow of data itself can be a barrier for foreign firms trying to understand the market. It can create an uneven playing field, favoring domestic players who navigate the system better.
And finally, under market access, the government just estimating. Buying Chinese, state procurement.
Yeah, directing government contracts to domestic companies. That's a very direct way to shut out foreign competition from potentially huge deals. It supports local industry and limits opportunities for outsiders. Very effective.
Okay, so we've gone through resources, finance, supply chains, market access, lots of specific tools. But the last section in the source material looks broader strategic trade policies, multilateral influence, shaping the global system.
Right. Moving beyond just bilateral issues. Think about targeted tariffs.
We know about those, but the angle here is
Political pressure, not just economic impact, but hitting sectors important to, say, specific political groups in the U.S. The aim might be to create domestic pushback on U.S. policymakers.
using trade to influence politics internally. Clever.
And then there's using existing systems, like the WTO. China can use the WTO's dispute settlement process, file cases, challenge U.S. actions. Even if they don't win every time, it ties things up, creates legal knots, political headaches, delays things. It's using the system itself.
Okay. And finally, these big regional deals. RCEP, the Belt and Road Initiative.
Hugely important for China's strategy. Agreements like RCEP create massive trade blocs, often without the U.S. involved. That strengthens ties within the region, with China often at the center.
Shifting the center of gravity for trade?
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
And Belt and Road, building infrastructure across continents that physically rewires trade routes and strengthens China's influence across huge swaths of the globe. It's about reshaping the global economic map, really. Think about how that changes global trade dynamics over the long haul.
Wow. Okay, so wrapping this deep dive up, the big takeaway from the material seems to be that China has this incredibly varied toolbox. It goes way, way beyond just slapping tariffs on things.
Absolutely. It's multifaceted. Control over key resources, financial maneuvering, leveraging supply chain dependencies, using market access as a carrot or stick, and shaping the broader international trade rules. It's a complex strategic arsenal. Understanding all these different dimensions is pretty critical if you want to grasp modern global trade.
Right. So maybe the final thought to leave everyone with, drawing from all this. If these are the potential strategic plays, what are the most critical vulnerabilities other economies really need to think about addressing? And Maybe more interestingly, what kind of unexpected ripple effects could we see globally as these strategies play out? It really makes you think about how interconnected everything is. Thanks for unpacking all that.